I want to take a minute today just to show you what to expect when you're doing the coding problems on the 8 multiple choice part of the AP exam. And so what you're going to see is, sometimes you'll see code in blocks like this, and other times you might see code written like this. And what you should notice right now is that it's not in Python. And this class is actually language agnostic. It means it can be taught in any programming language. I just happen to choose Python because I think Python is a really great language for beginners to learn. But since this class is not taught in any particular language, what the College Board has done is they've kind of invented a simplified language and syntax that they're going to use. And so really when you're reading code, you're just kind of trying to figure out the logic of what they're doing. It's not an actual language. And so I think for the most part, you're going to find these problems are pretty easy to figure out. But what I want to do right now really is just make sure you're aware of a couple of the subtle but possibly important differences between their pretend language and Python. So when you take the exam, you're going to be given this reference sheet. And I would say definitely just keep this handy while you're answering the coding questions. And I've linked to it here so you can get a sneak peek at it. And it highlights, this goes through the syntax of their language. So here, when they want to store a value, they're using an arrow. And this says takes, some value and store it in a variable called A, and they're using an arrow for that. Well, we've done that. We do variable assignment as well. This says take this value 5 and store it in a variable called X. So I don't have an arrow here. Python uses the single equal sign for assignment, and that's really pretty much just because, when you're in most programming languages, you want to make all the characters that are in the language things that you can type, and arrow key is not something I can type. Just by the way, if any of you have ever programmed on your graphing calculator, they do have the STO, the store button, and it has an arrow symbol if you're using the programming language on the graphing calculators, on the Texas Instruments ones anyway. So, we have stuff like display in this programming language, which you could probably guess. Oh, yeah, that would be just, that's printing something on the screen. There's an input, which works the same way as it does in Python. Notice how, all of their, programming functions are in capital letters and Python's lowercase, but that really doesn't matter. The logic is the same. We can do arithmetic in their programming language. So it uses the same operators that we're normally using, the stars, the times, and the slashes, the division. One thing that is different is they just, we have the modulus operator in Python where we'd use a % sign and it will give us the remainder. So like 47 modulus 5 is 2 because there's 9 with a remainder of 2. And they're just going to actually use the word mod. So in their code, you'd see this, whereas that won't work in Python. We actually have to type the % sign or the % sign. All right. So the first place where you're going to see something that is a difference that you maybe have to be aware of is when they do ranges. They tend to be inclusive of the last value, whereas in Python, in most cases, it's not inclusive of the last value. So here, they say random 1, 3 can be 1, 2, or 3. And if I were writing in Python, and I want to do a die roll, I might use the rand range function, which goes from 1 and it's up to but not including 7. So this will give me the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's a subtle difference. And you just need to be aware of that so that doesn't trip you up on any of the questions. And we've seen this up to but not including in other places, like when we do string slices. If I did, here's the course as APCS, we'll change it to our class, APCS-P. And if we were going to get a slice of the string from 1 to 4, it's actually going to give us characters 1, 2, and 3 because it's up to but not including this last value. So hopefully you remember that from when we dealt with strings. As far as, comparisons, they just use standard math symbols. Right now, notice they're using a single equal sign for comparison, and in Python we use a double equal sign. So, they are using the arrow for storing a value and a single equal sign for comparing. In Python, we use a single equal for storing and a double equal for comparing. The not equals, well, in Python I might type exclamation equals because I don't have a not equals key in my keyboard, but they're just going to use that symbol, and then the other inequalities are just exactly what you would expect. When they start doing conditionals, they use the word not just like we do, ands and ors just like in Python. The conditional blocks might look a tiny bit different, so they're capitalizing and they're doing if else, but I think you'll be able to interpret that just fine. Now you can see when they write the code out here, they have curly braces, and this code is indented just a tiny bit, so you might see a question that looks, let's see, yeah. So they're using curly brackets to define blocks of code like in loops and inside conditionals, whereas in Python, we just use indentation to convey what is supposed to happen if this condition is true. Well, it's all of the lines that are indented, and they'll use the curly braces and indent. So some languages like Java and JavaScript use curly braces as well. Python just does not. But that shouldn't cause a problem. Let's see. They have loops in this language, and so here they have repeat n times. So that's just real simple, but that might be like in Python, if I wanted to repeat something 5 times, I might say something like this for I in range 5, and this will print. Right, this will print coding is fun 5 times, and they'll just say repeat 5 times if they wanted to do it. And notice how again, they're going to either use curly braces or indentation to say what should be repeated 5 times. They have a repeat until. And then you pass in a condition. Well, this is just like our while loop, right? So like, let's say I wanted to say I is 10, and then while I is greater than 0, I'll print I on the screen, and then I'll just subtract 1 from I every iteration of the loop. So this code in here is going to keep getting executed until I is no longer greater than 0. Now, there's a little bit of a flip-flop in the thinking here, because when we write while loops, this condition is this is what's supposed to be true when you keep going, and they are doing a when you stop condition instead. Okay, so grammatically it's just a little bit different when you think about it. But anyway, this is essentially going to work like a while loop. Lists. All right, this is another place where be careful with this. So I'm going to move me. Be careful with lists when you're answering questions on the exam, because they use 1 indexing, whereas we use 0 indexing. I really wish they would use 0 indexing in their fake language. It's not like 0 indexing is hard to understand, and every programming language I can think of uses 0 indexing. So I feel like they should try that. But anyway, in their language, this is value at index 1, and that's index 2, and that's index 3. Whereas, right, with our code, right, if I wanted to print num list 0, well, I'm going to print the 6, and that's position 1. So this is an important thing to be careful of. Look over the reference sheet and pay attention to that when you're answering their multiple choice questions, because I think it would be real easy to get a one-off error and get tripped up just because you think it behaves like most other programming languages do. And then I would say read over this reference sheet before the exam, and you're going to look at how do you assign things in a list? Well, they still use the arrow key, so same thing here, right? You just pass in the list. The list of numbers gets assigned to num list. Let's see. Some things you can do to a list is, if we wanted to add a value to the end of a list, they have an append function. We do the list name dot append and then the number. They are doing append and then the list name and then the value that gets tacked onto the end. You can also insert. If I wanted to insert in Python, I do have an insert function, and this says insert a 19 at position 5. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That means a 19 should get inserted where the 11 is, and then that means the 11 and the 14 will shift over. Let's see. And so, yeah, there's the 19 before the 11 and the 14. And then I appended a 7 to the end of the list. They have a remove where you pass in an index. In Python, it would be delete, and then you do the list, and then the index you want to get rid of. So 0, 1, 2, 3. Right? This statement would remove the 12 from the list. But remember, if in their language, if they said remove element 3, they'd be taking this one out, right? Because they're using 1, 2, 3, 1 indexing, where we would be using 0 indexing. Let's see. Oh, this for each loop, right? We have that concept as well. The syntax is very, very similar to Python, actually. So they say for each item in list, and we just say for n in list, or for whatever variable we want to do in the list. And this, n becomes sequentially each element of this list. And then we can do whatever we want with it. So here I'm using the modulus to count the number of even numbers in the list. And the very last thing that you'll see is when they define procedures, right? We call them functions in Python, but they call them procedures. And they will actually use the word procedure, and then they give the procedure a name, and then the arguments are in parentheses separated by commas. We do the exact same thing. Like if I wanted to make a triangle area function, I just say def because I'm defining a function, right? And they're writing the word procedure here, and then here's my arguments. So here's my 1/2 base times height. And then if I wanted to do a function call, right, so here's a return statement, we can do that. And so my function call will be triangle area. And then you can see that the 5 goes in for B, the 12 goes in for H, and then the whatever value gets returned is going to get stored in. This will evaluate to the return value, and that gets stored right in the area here. The last thing you're going to get on the exam, and I think, as long as you do some of the practice multiple choice or do all the practice multiple choice questions, you'll be fine on these. But they have a robot that they control with code, and the robot has functions to move forward, rotate left, rotate right. And what they're generally going to do is put the robot in a grid or in a maze and say, which instructions will get the robot from point A to point B, or how many steps will it take for the robot to get from here to here, or as long as you practice those, you'll be just fine. All right. So anyway, just don't want you to be surprised when you see, when you first see the coding questions on the exam and you go, oh, that looks a little bit weird. It's not any particular language, right? There was no. It's not like this is in some language that I never taught you. There is, it's an imaginary programming language meant to be similar to whatever language the teachers, different teachers of this course might choose to use. All right. Just go ahead and mark this assignment as done, just to confirm that you've actually watched this video and looked over the reference sheet. All right. I will talk to you later.